Awesome. Thank you so much for the introduction. So hello and welcome to day 2 of Everflow Connect. We are super excited to chat a bit today about going global. It's going to have a focus on partnerships, payment, and expansion. So my name is Tyla Cobb, and I am with Acceleration Partners. We'll start actually with a brief round of introductions. So Marwan, maybe you want to kick us off with a little bit about your background and your company.
Thank you. Hopefully you can hear me and see me at the moment. So just to repeat that we help businesses to pay and get paid around the world. The simplest way to describe Veem is like Venmo for businesses globally. And we have about 180,000 businesses that are signed up on the platform, and it's designed to make it really simple to move money around the world. That's what we do.
Awesome, thank you. David, do you want to go next? Oh, your audio for me is off.
How about now?
Jackpot, thank you.
Awesome. Hi guys, I'm David Stellato, VP of Business Development with DFO Global. We are a performance marketing agency that operates globally. We have an affiliate network that buys across all media platforms as well as internal media buyers. In addition to that, we are a merchant, so we buy and sell our own goods as well as come out and roll out patented products.
Awesome. Thank you. Emily?
Great, can you hear me?
We can.
Awesome. Hi, my name is Emily. I'm the head of growth and partnerships at a company called Voiceflow. We are Toronto headquartered, but based all around the world. And what we do is we allow anybody to design, develop, and prototype voice apps with little to no code. So really what we're working on is trying to create a way to democratize conversational design and make voice applications accessible to anybody.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. So I'm with Acceleration Partners, as I mentioned. I'm Senior Director of Global Accounts. So we're obviously an agency. We really specialize in global partner marketing. We have a very specific approach that we call the AP way. And once we find the people, we train them on our methodology and then work very closely with them on understanding what the brand is trying to achieve, and then work with them to refine their marketing campaigns. And we do that anywhere in the world. So it seems like we have a very appropriate group for the panel discussion today, and I'm super excited to dive in. To set the stage, we thought it would be useful to just kind of understand how we all got into the world of global and kind of what was our path here. So Emily, if you want to kick us off and just share a little bit about your journey and when and why you started focusing on global, that would be awesome.
Sure. So I think my interest in global marketing actually started well before Voiceflow, back when I used to work at a company called Tilt. We were an American payments company built on making it easy to send requests or send payment or split payments between friends. And we had gone very, very viral in the States. And we're now trying to replicate that in Canada, the UK, Netherlands, Australia, and beyond. And while I started on trying to take what we had built in the States and replicate that in Canada, our team very quickly started to hit a ton of growth challenges on how can we change that? How can we replicate it? How can we make it better in other places? So as our team became the international marketing and growth team, I started to learn a ton of the pros and cons of that made our product ultimately much better. So it became quite organic when I came into the position at Voiceflow to take a look at the data, take a look at who was in our market for voice, and start to see these trends of communities all around the world. And that very quickly became not only an awesome channel for us to use in terms of building community and organic growth, but now also instructing partnerships, instructing how are we creating and maintaining global feature sets, as well as even sub-communities that will help inform our product in the future.
Very interesting. David, what about you? What was your path?
Sure. I mean, DFO has actually been a global first company since its inception around 7 years ago. And even prior to that, one of our co-founders, our CEO, has been doing it for 20 plus years in a previous life. I think the big angle for us is obviously being in digital media, being able to diversify and hit all the different markets, but also from a physical product standpoint, the US and English speaking geos can become very saturated. And so those who are able to expand outside of that can be a lot more competitive.
Got it. Thank you. And Marwan, what about you?
Well, we started the business focusing on global markets. We always had this point of view that when it comes to payments, international payments, doing international bank wire is one of the most complex experiences. And so we wanted to simplify that whole method and making it really simple for folks to move money around the world. So right from day one, we started with like 10 countries, and then we started to add more as we go. So now we're like 110 countries, 50 plus currencies. And I've always been in global settings before, before Veem used to run e-commerce at Western Union. So I've had always this, focus on international markets and international payments because they tend to be more complex markets to work with. And we believe that the world, is going to be more and more global. Companies are going to find that, to grow, they're going to have to expand beyond the local markets. And there needs to be a whole set of tools that help them with that. And that's why we wanted to focus right from the start on global markets.
Totally. I imagine that took a lot of planning up front. In terms of selecting the countries that you wanted to focus on out of the gate, like what criteria did you use to determine that?
Yeah, we started with the first set of customers we had. They really wanted us to focus on Europe, so we got Europe done first. Then next in line, we had Canada and the UK. And then we started expanding from there to, China, and then we started adding Southeast Asia, and then we started going, to following the customer really, whenever we're talking to the customer, we ask them what's next on your list of countries that you'd like us to support, and we would add them along the way as we grow the product and add more functionality. We followed what the customer wanted.
Got it. Interesting. From my side, I've been kind of in the global realm for the last few years when I had been working on some of our largest advertiser relationships who were really looking to go deeper in APAC and EMEA and LATAM. Really, the focus for them was a bit twofold. So of course they wanted to drive conversions and actions, but also help with some of the brand awareness with partners too. A lot of that was content focused. So since then, I joke that I'm learning something every day and I'm drinking from the fire hose because with every market nuance and I'm like constantly learning. So I think one of the biggest takeaways for me has been around communication and just the various modes of communication and tone and style and how that can vary so significantly from market to market. Some people like just a quick WhatsApp message, especially in LATAM. Or, if you're in Australia, they want to meet at a coffee shop and chit chat a little bit, or, sometimes they just want to do email and traditional meetings, so just being aware of that and adjusting your approach because you have to meet the partner or the vendor or the prospect, whatever it may be, to where they are. So it's really interesting to hear all of our different journeys. So I think we definitely have the right group today. So thinking about all of our experience and expertise, what are some factors that should exist in a company before they start expanding globally? David, do you want to kick us off on that one?
Sure. I think first and foremost, they should have their infrastructure and their processes down cold. For example, with selling physical goods, selling them in the US versus selling them in Latin completely different. I mean, just because you can drive customer acquisition and you may even have the proper processing, if you don't have the proper, end delivery system to getting the product to the door, that can result in a lot of issues and refunds and chargebacks. So making sure and understanding the differences of the new markets you're going into.
100%. Emily, what about you?
I think also really making sure that you bring in somebody that that knows that space well early on in your strategies. So making sure that you not only have someone to help inform what that looks like so that you're doing it correctly, or that you're being sensitive in the right spots, or are thinking about things from a different perspective, as well as really making sure that you've considered the long-term sustainability of that channel. So do you have the resources in place to maintain that, to accelerate it or expand it if you need it? And is that perspective something that is going to continue to be a focus for that company? Because you're going to need buy-in not only extended throughout that company, but also from whatever channel or partner that you have on the floor as well.
Totally. Those are all great factors to consider. What about your perspective on factors to consider before expanding globally, Marwan?
Yeah, just adding to what David and Emily said, understanding the nuances of local markets, figuring out who's playing where in that market, and going at it with a partner makes a big difference. And I would go with an approach where you crawled and walked and run. It's very difficult unwinding, in international markets if something doesn't go to plan. It's not that simple to unwind it compared to unwinding something in your local market. So I would just simply rely on some partners to work with to understand the dynamics of the local market, and then have the processes in place to make sure you go at it in a phased approach. It's not that simple to conquer international markets, so I would do it slowly.
Totally. No, great points. I know I was just chatting with someone internally on my side last week, and she was like, yeah, you just have to trust the experts because you're never going to know anything or everything. So I think leaning into those folks on your team that know a certain market really well, and just, having faith in them too. A couple things that I would add from my perspective, and this is kind of thinking through a marketing lens, is stakeholder alignment. So in a lot of these large global organizations, there's many different teams. Sometimes there's someone focused at the country level, at the regional level, it could be at HQ, and sometimes they're going in 3 or 4 different directions. So I think proactively, hitting the pause button before you're really turning on the hose globally is coming together on, what is our North Star? What are our primary objectives? What is my role in kind of the bigger picture? What do I have authority over approving? And just making sure you all can operate in a really scalable way, so we're not stepping on each other's toes or duplicating efforts, is something that I've learned along the way. And a lot of times some of the bigger companies have a little bit more hard time doing that because there's just so many more people to get on the same page. Another factor that I think is really important, and I think everyone touched on this in some capacity, is the importance of having what we call boots on the ground. So it's those people that are actually in the ground, on the country, talking to the people. They probably grew up there, they've lived there a really long time, and they really have their finger on that pulse of, those local nuances, and they're taking all of those things when they're putting their strategic plans down on paper, when they're talking to partners, they're being transparent about that. And then just from a time zone perspective, having someone that is able to jump on a call or get back to them in an email really quickly, when you're on the other side of the world, a 12-hour delay can easily turn into a couple days if you're not careful. So there's definitely benefit for having local people in region, working with partners and prospects and vendors and all of that good stuff. So those are some great factors for people to consider before expanding globally. Thank you for all of those. Also, from our experience, and this should be an interesting discussion, what do you think is the worst mistake companies make for expanding too quickly? Marwan, do you want to start us off on that one?
I think, making assumptions that what works in one country works in another. And sometimes, I hear that a lot with folks I talk to. There's a point of view that if you get the formula working in the US, for example, then I should be able to have the same playbook function in Brazil or in China. And that what we miss in all this is that these markets are so different. Everything about them is going to be different than what you're used to. And so more important is understanding actually the reason why the product is successful in the country you're in, like digging really deep into that and trying to see if the assumptions, the drivers of why it's successful in the local market are going to hold in the new market. And you'll find that more often you're going to need quite a bit of customization to the product to make it work in the new market. The fabric, the structure of it might be fine, but there are a significant amount of customization that you would need to put in place to get it to really work in that country. And so that's like one of the things to watch for. And that's why I would really recommend to actually go in a mode where you do a proof of concept first to make sure it works before you go at it in full mode. Because it's not that simple to take something from one country and plant it in a new country and assume it's going to go.
Totally agree. I find that oftentimes there's a lot of educating or explaining why it's not as simple as some people might think it would be, and it goes back to all of those nuances and what makes it different. So I think, yeah, that's definitely an interesting perspective. David, what about you in terms of like the worst mistake companies can make for expanding too quickly?
Sure. I think to piggyback on some of the things Marwan was saying, understanding who the local competition is in the new markets you're going up against. One thing, for example, when we're selling physical goods, we always want to have localized payments for the markets we're going into. A good example is if you're selling into the Netherlands, there's an alternative payment method called Ideal. It's comparable to like a PayPal in the United States. If I was selling a product and I didn't have that as an option compared to a domestic competitor, they're going to win out every time against me. I think other things also understanding, privacy laws, taxes, duties, VATs, things that could sneak up on you, not being familiar with that country.
Totally. I experienced that with Brazil, who in Brazil, there's just all kinds of unique nuances. So there was definitely a learning curve there. So I can echo that one perfectly. Emily, what about you?
I think I agree with all the points that have been said, and I think just to kind of add, even so from our side, we expanded. So we expand during, we're expanding a product and aren't able to necessarily get on the phone or talk to people or have people communicate with one of our reps. So we have to make sure that the entire product, not just how we define it, but all of the resourcing around that is also done in the proper language to support that. In the same way that we search for product market fit in one market, it is unfair and incorrect to assume that product market fit is just like this unanimous thing that happens to be exactly the same everywhere else. So I think that a big mistake that a lot of people do is, number one, make that assumption that it works once and I'm just going to cram it. And you see that not only in trying to go global, but also even in the channels that you use to be successful in that. And I think as well, trying to assume that you're going in at the same velocity that you're currently operating at. Mm-hmm. So I think that a lot of people think about global expansion as like a doubling factor of here's everything that we're currently outputting in, let's say, North America, where I may have started. I'm going to do absolutely everything that I'm currently doing the second that we have like day one in another country, in another area. And you forget about that scaling and the creep up that is required in order to make those things successful. So I think just to summarize that, I think paying attention to the small details that make your current customers successful on the platform and making sure those are translated and work with the correct dialect and how your new product works over there. And second, really making sure that that you're also taking into account the scale up period, because that's how you're going to win over your global strategy long-term internally and continue to secure budget to keep going down that later on.
Totally. You took the words right out of my mouth. I was gonna also add coming in with kind of a test and learn mindset, because what has worked in one region is not going to just always translate. And there's going to be a little bit of throwing the spaghetti on the wall and seeing what sticks and changing some variables here and there and monitoring, how the results are pacing. And then with that, there's going to be a lot of testing. That means the ramp time is, sometimes going to be a little bit slower. So as you're communicating expectations internally, build in some buffer for that extra testing and optimization. And the ramp up that you saw when you turned on a campaign in the US, it's not going to look the same in a different country because it's just totally different. So I think setting those expectations internally are also really important too, because I think everyone, to your point, Emily, they're thinking it's going to be like a light switch and all of a sudden it's just going to be the same everywhere. And that's just not the case. So those are all good things to keep on the radar as you're looking to expand into new regions. In terms of thinking about your own kind of companies and what you've learned, what are some of the key business processes that have helped with global expansion? David, do you want to kick us off? Oh, it looks like David might be frozen, so we'll let his Zoom come back to us. Looks like you're back, David.
Sorry about that.
No worries. I was just asking, what are some of the business processes you've implemented within your own organizations and companies that really helped with global expansion?
Sure. I think the biggest thing with our physical goods products, we'll start with what we know and the English speaking markets. And once we have it all dialed in, then kind of replicate region by region, going to Europe and LATAM, APAC. And I think from, being a part of a company that's 300 people, that has 10 offices across the globe, being able to have collaborative meetings at strategic times. So sometimes they're early morning for me, sometimes they're late evening, but getting that time with the people who have the boots on the ground, as you said, has been very, very helpful.
Totally agree. Emily, what about you? Any processes or procedures that you've implemented internally for global expansion?
Yeah, I'll contrast that from a much smaller company. I wish we had that many people sometimes. But our team, for context, is we're sitting just under 20, and we're operating in 6 or 7 global markets right now. And that's a lot, even if one of us were to take one. So I think a really big thing that's been helpful, at least in the early stages on getting our strategy out there and maintaining it, is connecting people within the community with each other. So for us, not only is it a great way for us to actually maintain strong relationships with these different communities and give more responsibility to our leads that are down there, but also it drastically helps to create one hub that we can get a lot of feedback in, that we can also actually have operate outside of the resources that are restricted within our own team. And I think as well, in the early days, it's super, super important to also do or be more strategic about time zone mapping. So this was a huge mistake that I personally made even in the last few months, where I previously was handling most of the meetings in India, Australia, and in Europe, while I was in Eastern Standard Time Zone, which seems still pretty crazy, but I was so used to that when I moved over to Pacific Standard, I didn't take into account how those global markets typically, or at least our partners within them, operated. So did my meeting times still align with their meeting times? Did our strategy on how we used to do our digests or do our more frequent meetings still match? And the case was it wasn't the same anymore. So being mindful of trying to match over whatever time zones that you have, or make sure that they're connected with each other, will drastically help that resourcing issue.
Totally. I'm actually taking a meeting tonight at 8:30 with our APAC team. So it's a lot of flexibility, and I think it's a give and a take on both sides. So personally, our APAC team is a little bit smaller than our US team. So they find themselves needing to watch recordings a lot. So I think that's one thing that we've done, is just making sure, you know, when we're in a situation where everyone can't join live, that we're recording or sending the clip notes so everyone's getting the same information. We also use Slack, and making sure that, you know, we're creating reminders and following up, which has been really helpful, but completely agree on the time zone nuance. Marwan, what would you add to that?
I mean, I think there's, besides tools and processes, I think one of the key success factors is actually giving autonomy to the folks that are in various countries to operate in their own countries. Because trying to figure out how, you know, pick a country, Germany or China or Philippines, work from San Francisco or New York, you know, good luck with that. I mean, you know, you might as well try to figure out how the country works from the people that are in the country. And so giving them the autonomy to operate and give guidance to, you know, the folks in the US or in Canada, that would be a lot more helpful. Because the other way around tends to take what you know in the market that you're in and trying to essentially assume that it's going to apply to the country that you're trying to deal with. And more often you'll find that the reverse actually is the more accurate, that the feedback from the ground is going to be more helpful in shaping your views on the country than the other way around.
Mm-hmm.
So I just give a lot more autonomy to the various country managers and to the folks on the ground to operate in their own countries and influence a lot of decisions, you know, with headquarters.
Yep, those are great points. I think one thing, of course, we can't do right now just due to travel restrictions, but I think it's good to have people visit each other in the various countries too. I mean, I've spent some time in Asia, and you learn so much from the time that you're on their time zone, and you're liaising and you're seeing what they're dealing with, you know, being on opposite schedules from the vast majority of people. So it's very illuminating. I would echo what everyone said around, you know, just making sure everyone has clear processes. One thing that we talk about a lot on our side is, you know, what can be regional, localized versus what needs to be centralized globally. So we're having constantly discussions around, you know, what should be regional or what should be local. And I think it depends. And you know, when it's very different from a market perspective, that's when you have to kind of trust what you were just talking about, Marwan, and just lean into the local expertise. So that's a good reminder. Another thing I find myself frequently doing is reminding people on our team to think with your global hat on. So whether you're rolling out a new campaign or a new process, you know, think through the lens of people, your team in Asia, your team in Latin America, Europe, and, you know, how are they going to receive this information? Because your team is different, you know, culturally and locally as well. So you have to kind of think through that lens too. So those are all good reminders to think about when your own business is looking to expand globally too, to make sure you're set up for success. Switching gears slightly, so I know most, you know, people that are expanding, they're looking to grow their customer base. So in terms of tips for scaling user acquisition in new markets, would love to hear about some of the tactics that you've deployed and what's worked well. So David, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. I mean, for everything that we do, obviously, we build out direct response funnels. I think especially for companies who are going into a new market, don't try to go with everything at once. Pick what your hero product or service is going to be. Focus on driving the acquisition. Profitability is important, but the acquisition is the more important thing. You want to get them acquired, and then you can obviously always cross-sell, upsell down the road, and that's where you can really build up the lifetime value. But having a focused approach is definitely what's helped work with us and a lot of our partners.
Got it. Thank you. What about you, Emily?
Yeah, I think that in a lot of cases, in trying to get things going, I think for us on like the B2B side, and I'll kind of touch on both sides on trying to get more businesses on versus customers. But on the B2B side, definitely going in and trying to do our research on what businesses are doing the absolute best there right now. Are there any alignments? Are there any ways that we can help them come into the markets that we're in exchange for them helping with intros or even just co-marketing? I think that now especially is a really great time to really rethink and talk to companies and do a lot of online partnerships that would have typically required a quick jet across the country and a conversation or two with the teams. So I think that that's a really good tactic that's worked well for us, as well as on trying to get more end users, so more directly. I think that as even just a marketing campaign, making sure that you have specific landings, that you have things that are translated, that you are playing around with different lead magnets, or even trying to exist in the places that those communities already live. So for instance, when we were expanding and looking for developers that were interested in voice in India, we originally started to replicate on Facebook, which was where we first started with North America. But instead we realized that co-model was the place that they wanted to go or where they were talking. So it might start as easy as just trying to figure out where they already exist and trying to play within that ecosystem.
Yeah, that's a great point. Marwan, what about you?
I think it depends a little bit on the product you're trying to sell into the new market. So, whether it's a consumer product or business, whether it's, SMB or enterprise, the go-to-market models are going to vary. Regardless, though, I'm probably a bit more biased towards going to a new market through partners and channels. They know their ground, they know what needs to be localized, they know how to localize it, they have a customer base to get you going. So I'm generally more biased towards, finding the right partners to start with, giving them enough incentives to help you out so that there's skin in the game, so that you get, distribution in the new market that you're going after.
Yeah, networking and building those connections is something that we've also learned is very huge, and you have to tap into that network to understand sometimes what the local and regional nuances are. So completely echo that. I think from my side, in terms of scaling user acquisition, I think, David, you might have touched on this, but it's not spreading yourself too thin. So it's, instead of launching in 15 countries at once, maybe pick 3 or 4 or 5 that you might have a strong likelihood in seeing success. Maybe there's, a similar language, or, currencies are consistent, whatever it may be. And, just going deep, learning from that experience, and then slowly, tacking on another country or another market, and always, optimizing on those learnings each time. So that's a good one. And then I think the second one, and I added this already earlier in the discussion, was around just having that open mindset of testing and learning. One tactic that works in the US isn't going to work in Germany or Australia, or the partner types are going to be totally different. So just being willing to fail, I think, is going to be important too. And as long as you're learning from those failures and you're changing what you're doing next time, I think it's really important that you go in kind of with that open mind, to not limit yourself. And oftentimes I would say you're probably going to push yourself outside of your comfort zone or try something that you never thought you would do. But that's, very common in that region. So, I think you have to kind of adapt as well. So those are all some great tips. Thank you for sharing. We're coming towards the end of the time here. We have one more question before we jump over to the Q&A. So just thinking forward about what's to come as it relates to global expansion, I would love to understand how each of you think the process of expanding globally will change over the next few years. And Emily, do you want to start us off on that one?
Sure. I'm super intrigued by what global expansion is going to look like in the next little bit. I think that all of us know that there's been so many changes over the last few months, with restrictions changing, targeting changing, user behaviors online changing, that the way that we consume and the way that we target is going to very similarly probably experience some ripple effects of that, or will have some sustained changes. And I think now more than ever, this idea of global is becoming part of the equation earlier on, where you have maybe now more people who are relocating into different areas, who are thinking about partnerships in a new way, or might even now represent a much larger group of early users in how you might want to first start your product. So I think that partnerships are going to become a lot more important earlier on in companies scaling. And I think that they're going to become, at least for us, have become a huge pillar on how we try to even incorporate every new feature. So I think it's going to become table stakes rather than something that you kind of add on as you start to mature. So I'm really curious to kind of hear more thoughts on that. I know we've seen a lot of distributed trends with people kind of carrying what they've learned in our North American markets over with them as they start to move around. But I'm curious if anyone else has even started to see new trends arise from that, even in the last few months as well.
Anyone to add to that? Nothing's coming to mind for me, but I see Marwan, you're nodding.
Well, I mean, I think, you know, speaking of the last few months, COVID created a world that you're going to see equalization and flattening of the world. You're going to see companies leveraging all kinds of markets, not only to sell their products or services, but also to leverage remote labor. So, you know, we see that type of volume happen to all kinds of markets where, you know, not only you're finding suppliers in different markets, you're finding labor in different markets to optimize the way your company runs. And I think now more than ever, there's going to be a significant amount of tools that are going to help you leverage the world, from tools like Zoom to LinkedIn to Hangouts to Upwork to Veem to Slack to you name it. The amount of tools available to allow you to quickly leverage what you have, to sell what you have in different markets and leverage labor in different markets are going to explode, especially now that we're going into a structural change where remote is going to be here for a long period of time.
Totally. I would add that for those companies that were negatively impacted by COVID too, they might be looking at, now's the time to capitalize on some new audiences and some new markets. And I think there could be increased interest in that too, just given the landscape right now. David, from your perspective, anything to add?
Yeah, to echo some of the things that were said already, I think of interest, the additional suppliers and manufacturers, redundancy across different skill sets that might have been isolated to certain parts of the world. I know in the e-commerce world, a lot of product is sourced from Asia. I think we might see, more manufacturing diversified across other parts of the world. I think also, I can't speak for all of you guys, but I think a lot of us have also seen that we can work very strongly and collectively with the global teams across the world from home. And I'm very interested to see how that's going to change things, not just from, a collaborative effort with team members, but also people's purchasing behaviors. Whereas before, if I was commuting into New York City and I was on my way there grabbing a cup of coffee from Dunkin' Donuts, if I'm working at home, maybe I'm buying a Keurig instead of that. So it's interesting to see how all of this is really going to change.
Totally. And if we're saving money on gas, maybe we can buy some extra fancy coffee.
Sounds good to me.
Totally. Well, that brings us to the end here. If we have any questions it looks like we do. So we'll start with the top. Does your service or product serve global markets or globally minded consumers? How? From AP's perspective, yes. So obviously we have clients that just operate in the US, but we have clients that operate in multiple regions. So we as a business are really going after advertisers that want to work in multiple regions. So with that, a lot of times we have internal dialogue with our existing clients, and understand, of course, focusing on those that have, you know, business in EMEA or APAC, wherever, and kind of just have open dialogue with them. And then we, of course, have regional experts from a marketing perspective that are positioning our brand statement and our objective that really aligns with what's important in that region. I think in EMEA, you know, consultancy, you know, working with specialists is something that really resonates. So I think, you know, adjusting our approach to talk to that. But anyone else have perspective on that question?
Well, we service customers in 110 countries, and we typically service customers that are paying suppliers, paying labor, moving money between their bank accounts. And sometimes we service customers that collect for purchases from different parts of the world. So we by nature, you know, service customers globally.
Likewise here, I mean, from a digital media perspective and bringing on new client acquisition, we work with partners who are US based, selling globally, but also clients who are based in Europe looking to sell into the US and vice versa everywhere else.
In the same way over here, we're a design tool. So we want to enable anybody to build from anywhere, and likely on their side as well, we have a ton of designers and developers that work all around the globe. So our tool already integrates in with a ton of NLP, so natural language processing and understanding from all around the world to understand those different dialects. And we also have the prototype function. So it really makes sure that even if the, let's say, Alexa or Google Assistant aren't live in those areas around the world yet, your prototype and you still being able to work on those things is still possible.
Thank you. A few minutes left. Second question is, what is the #1 tool in your tech stack or app stacks besides your own that has helped your business scale at home and abroad? Anyone have a favorite coming to mind?
I say Zoom works really well.
Zoom, Slack, Jira, collaboration tools, absolutely.
I think so many. I think for us, like outside of like Slack, outside of our productivity tools for our product team, like we've found things like Humbledot or Soapbox or things that are more focused on maintaining culture outside of the office have been extremely important. So just maintaining an element of normalcy in there, I think has been really, really helpful. And would definitely recommend like looking at anything that also complements more asynchronous collaboration, since I think all of us are starting to adopt new work-life balances, that I think tools that adopt that are going to become more and more important.
Yeah, we've been using asynchronous video, a tool called Loom, to just share internally, you know, with my APAC team, you know, a quick update versus typing out a long, complicated email. It's easier to just record yourself, and it's more personal too. So definitely agree on that one. Another one that I think, you know, takes some time to build out a solid framework, which we're working on now, is Smart Sheets, and how, you know, they're very collaborative. They can keep consistency across multiple regions and have everyone kind of have similar views on things. So that's another one that I would add to the list. Any other favorites come to mind?
I think like one last one would be on, we've been adopting a lot more no-code tools internally. So we want to try to build, like, bridge the technical gap for a lot of people, as we're not going to be able to do as many comprehensive demos or have to rely on as many people to get a single project through the door. So no code and being able to template out or create internal symbols for us to replicate has been really, really important as well.
Interesting. Cool. Well, I've truly enjoyed sharing the panel with all of you, and thank you for attending, and hope you got something out of the discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Likewise. Thank you, guys.